I stood in the hangar, staring at the parachute rig that was supposed to save my life. The lines had been sliced almost all the way through, hanging by a single fraying thread. Someone wanted me to plummet 10,000 feet to my death on my 58th birthday. I didn't cancel the jump. Instead, I sent a dummy out of that plane and watched my 3 children scream from the ground. Now, I am officially dead to the world, watching my own funeral from the shadows, waiting to see which one of my own flesh and blood tried to kill me. My name is Douglas, and for the last 30 years, I have built a manufacturing empire from the ground up. I gave my life to my work and my children. I thought I had done a good job. I raised 3 kids on my own after my wife passed away 2 decades ago. There is Robert, my eldest, who works as my VP. There is Sarah, my only daughter, who is an artist always struggling to make ends meet. And then there is Jason, the youngest, who drifted away from the family years ago and only recently came back. To celebrate turning 58, I decided to do something I had put off for my entire life. I wanted to go skydiving. I wanted to feel the rush of wind and the total freedom of flight. My children thought I was going through a midlife crisis, but they all agreed to come watch. They stood down in the drop zone, shielding their eyes against the sun, waiting to see their old man float down from the heavens. I was in the gear room of the hangar, alone. The instructor, a man named Jerry, who had been a drinking buddy of mine for years, had stepped out to check the fuel levels in the plane. I began to strap on my rig. I am a meticulous man. It is how I built my business. I check everything twice. As I ran my hands over the risers and the suspension lines of the main chute, my thumb caught on something jagged. I pulled the fabric back. My stomach dropped faster than any free fall ever could. The structural lines had been sawed at, not worn down, but deliberately cut with something sharp, likely a serrated knife. They were holding on by a few threads of nylon. The moment the chute deployed, the force would have snapped them instantly. I would have spiraled into the ground at terminal velocity. I couldn't breathe. The hangar suddenly felt very small and very cold. Who had access to this room? My children. They had all been in here 20 minutes ago to wish me luck. Robert had slapped me on the back. Sarah had fixed my collar. Jason had awkwardly hugged me. Jerry walked back in, whistling. He saw my face and stopped. I showed him the lines. The color drained from his face. He wanted to call the police immediately, but I grabbed his arm. If the police came now, it would be an investigation. Lawyers would get involved. The evidence might be circumstantial. And worst of all, the person who did this would know they failed. They would try again. I needed to know who it was. I needed to see their faces when they thought I was gone. I came up with a plan in seconds. We had a training dummy in the back, a heavy rubberized mannequin roughly my height and weight. We dressed it in my jumpsuit and helmet. Jerry agreed to help me, mostly because he was furious that someone had tampered with his equipment. We took the plane up. I hid in the back of the cargo hold under a tarp. Jerry pushed the dummy out at 12,000 feet. He pulled the ripcord as it exited. We watched from the window. The chute deployed, and just as I predicted, the lines snapped. The dummy plummeted. It was a terrifying, chaotic mess of fabric that trailed behind the weight like a streamer. It hit the ground in the distant field with a thud that I felt in my bones. From 12,000 feet you couldn't hear the screams, but I knew they were happening. We landed the plane on a private strip 5 miles away, a favor from one of Jerry's contacts. By the time the authorities arrived at the crash site, I was already in a motel room 3 towns over watching the local news. They reported it as a tragic accident. The body was too mangled for immediate identification, but the jumpsuit was mine. The closed casket funeral was scheduled for 3 days later. I enlisted Jerry's help to set up surveillance. I needed to see how my children grieved, or rather, if they grieved. I rented a nondescript van and parked it across the street from my own house, where the wake was being held. I had installed hidden cameras and audio bugs in the living room and the study the night before the jump, claiming I was doing security upgrades for the house. I sat in that van, wearing a hat and sunglasses, listening to the audio feed. The atmosphere in the house was heavy. People were crying. Neighbors were eating casseroles. But I wasn't interested in the neighbors. I was interested in Robert. Robert was 40 years old. He had been pressuring me to retire for 5 years. He had big ideas for the company, risky ideas that I always shot down. He had significant personal debt, a fact he tried to hide from me, but a father always knows. On the audio feed, I heard the library door close. It was Robert. I switched cameras to the library. He was pacing back and forth, sweat glistening on his forehead. He pulled out his phone. I turned up the volume on my headset. He dialed a number. His voice was a harsh whisper. He said, "Is it done?" Yeah. He's gone." "No, there's no body to ID yet, but I saw him fall. It's over. When do I get the money?" "I need that liquidity now." My heart shattered. My eldest son. The boy I had taught to ride a bike. He was talking about money before my body was even cold. He was confirming the kill. I felt a rage I didn't know I possessed. I wanted to storm into the house and strangle him, but I had to be sure. I had to know who he was talking to. Was it a hitman? A loan shark? I waited 2 days until the funeral was over. Robert left the cemetery and drove not to his home, but to an industrial park on the bad side of town. I followed him in a rented sedan. He pulled up behind an abandoned warehouse. I parked a block away and crept closer, keeping to the shadows. I saw Robert standing by his car looking terrified. A black SUV pulled up. 2 large men got out. One of them shoved Robert against the car. "You said you'd have the full amount when the old man kicked the bucket," the large man shouted. "I tried," Robert stammered. "Probate takes time. The accounts are frozen until the death certificate is processed. Please, I just need a few more days." "You don't have days," the man said, raising a fist. I was ready to intervene. I had a tire iron in my hand. I was going to save the ungrateful son who had killed me, just so I could send him to jail myself. But then Robert screamed something that stopped me cold. He screamed, "I did this for him!" I borrowed the money to pay off the EPA fines so Dad wouldn't find out the factory was leaking. I didn't want his legacy ruined. I didn't kill him. I just needed his life insurance to pay you back so his name stayed clean. The goon paused. The factory? I stood frozen behind a dumpster. The EPA fines? I knew nothing about EPA fines. Robert was crying now. I just wanted to protect the company. I didn't want him to die. I just needed the money to fix the mess I made. The goons let him go with a warning telling him he had 1 week. Robert slid down to the pavement, sobbing into his hands, crying out for me. He was apologizing to the air, begging my forgiveness for the mess he caused, not for my death. I lowered the tire iron. Robert was an idiot. He had mismanaged the plant and got into debt with loan sharks to cover it up. He was greedy for the insurance money, yes, but only to save my reputation. He hadn't cut the lines. He was reacting to my death, not causing it. I retreated to my car, feeling a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Robert was innocent of murder, though guilty of stupidity. That left 2, Sarah and Jason. I went back to the safe house. I couldn't sleep. If Robert was innocent, the danger was still very real. I focused my attention on Sarah. Sarah, my artistic daughter. She had always resented me. She blamed me for her mother's death. My wife had died of a stress-induced stroke, and Sarah believed my workaholism drove her to an early grave. Sarah had refused my money for years, living in a studio apartment, struggling to sell her paintings. But recently, she had come around. She had started visiting. She had been in the hangar. The next day I tracked Sarah. She wasn't mourning. She wasn't crying. She was at a high-end gallery downtown. I stood outside the window looking in. She was talking to the owner, a woman with severe glasses. I saw Sarah hand over a thick envelope. The woman opened it. It was cash, stacks of it. Where did Sarah get that kind of money? She was broke. unless she had been paid a down payment for something terrible. I used a directional microphone I had purchased from a private investigator supply store. I pointed it at the glass. I heard the gallery owner say, "This is a good start, Sarah. But with your father out of the picture, are you sure you can deliver the rest?" Sarah smiled. It was a cold smile I had never seen on her face before. She said, "Oh, don't worry. Now that he is gone, I have access to everything. The collection is mine. I'm going to sell it all." I never liked his taste anyway. My blood ran cold. The collection? She meant my antique watch collection. It was worth millions. I kept it in a safe in the study. Sarah continued. He was a hoarder. He didn't appreciate art. He just appreciated possession. I'm going to liberate those pieces. She was selling off my life's passion before I was even in the ground. But was that motive for murder? Greed is a powerful thing. I decided to break into her apartment while she was at the gallery. I needed to find proof. If she had hired someone to cut the lines, there would be a paper trail. Burner phones, notes, something. I picked the lock of her studio apartment. It smelled of turpentine and old coffee. I rifled through her desk. I found nothing incriminating. No weapon, no contacts for hitmen. But then I saw something covered by a sheet in the corner. It was a large canvas. I pulled the sheet off. It was a painting of me. But it wasn't a flattering portrait. It was me, but distorted. My eyes were black holes. My mouth was sewn shut. And in the background of the painting, there were figures falling from the sky. The paint was dry. She had painted this weeks ago. She had painted me falling from the sky before I had even decided to go skydiving. How could she have known? I heard the key turn in the lock. Sarah was home early. I had nowhere to hide. The apartment was one open room. I scrambled behind a stack of large canvases near the window just as the door opened. Sarah walked in, humming. She was on the phone. She said, "Yes, I know it's tragic. But honestly, it's a relief. He was suffocating me." I held my breath. She walked over to the portrait of me. She touched the painted face. She whispered, "I told you, Dad. I told you everything falls apart eventually." Then she did something that made me question everything. She took a palette knife and slashed the canvas. She slashed my face in the painting over and over again with a violence that made me flinch. She hated me. That was clear. But did she kill me? Then her phone rang again. She answered it on speaker. A male voice said, "Sarah, did you get into the safe?" Sarah sighed. "Not yet. The police sealed the study, but I have the combination." He wrote it down in his journal. "I'm going over there tonight to clean it out." The voice said, "Good. We need to destroy the evidence before the lawyers see it." "Evidence? What evidence?" Sarah said. "I know. If they find out what he did to Mom, his legacy is ruined anyway. I'd rather just take the money and let his reputation rot." My heart hammered against my ribs. What I did to Mom. I loved my wife. I did everything for her. What lies had she told herself? I waited until she went into the bathroom to shower. I slipped out of the apartment, my mind racing. Sarah believed I had harmed her mother. She was looting my house. She had predicted my fall in a painting. It looked bad. It looked like she was the one, but I had to be sure. I had to catch her in the act of destroying evidence. I raced back to my house. I used my key to enter the back way. The house was silent. The police tape was still across the study door, but it had been peeled back. Someone had already been here. I walked into the study. The safe was open. It was empty. The watches were gone. But on the desk, there was a single file folder. It was labeled Medical Records Evelyn. Evelyn was my late wife. I opened it. It wasn't medical records. It was a series of letters written by my wife to my brother. I read the first one. My hands shook. "Douglas suspects nothing. He thinks the baby is his. We have to be careful. The date on the letter was nearly 30 years ago. The date corresponded with Sarah's conception. I dropped the letter. Sarah wasn't my biological daughter. She was my brother's. My brother who had died in a car crash a year after she was born. Did Sarah know? I heard a floorboard creak behind me. I spun around. Standing in the doorway was not Sarah. It was Jason, my youngest. He was holding a serrated hunting knife, the same kind of knife that could slice through parachute lines. "Dad?" he whispered, his face pale as a sheet. "You're supposed to be dead." Midpoint rehook. I stared at my youngest son, the one who had always been the quietest, the one who had drifted away. He was holding a weapon, and I was standing in a dead man's study reading letters that proved my entire family life was a lie. But as I looked into Jason's eyes, I realized the terror. There wasn't the terror of a killer caught in the act. It was the terror of a boy who had stumbled into a nightmare he didn't understand. And then the phone in his pocket began to buzz. He didn't answer it. But in the silence of the room, I could hear the voice on the other end, screaming through the thin fabric of his jeans. It was a woman's voice, and it wasn't Sarah. I took a step toward Jason. "Put the knife down, son." Jason dropped the knife. It clattered on the hardwood. "Dad," he sobbed, "I didn't do it. I swear, I came here to protect you." "Protect me from who?" I asked. "From her," Jason whispered. "From who?" Jason looked at the phone buzzing on the floor. "From your first love." I stood there in the dim light of the study, my heart racing. My son, Jason, was shaking. The knife lay on the floor between us, gleaming ominously. The phone in his pocket had stopped buzzing, leaving a heavy silence in the room. I asked him again who he was protecting me from. He kicked the knife away and slumped into the leather armchair. My armchair. He looked like a frightened child, not a grown man. He told me that for the last 6 months a woman had been contacting him. She approached him at a coffee shop claiming to be an old friend of his mother's. She was charming, wealthy, and seemed to know everything about our family history. Jason said her name was Elena. Hearing that name was like taking a punch to the gut. Elena. I hadn't spoken that name in 35 years. Jason continued. He said Elena told him dark stories about me. She told him I was a tyrant, that I had driven his mother to her death, and that I didn't love my children, only my business. Jason, who had always felt like the outcast of the family, was vulnerable. He listened to her. She groomed him, feeding his resentment. I asked him about the knife. He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. He said he didn't bring the knife to kill me. He brought it to hide it. He had found it in the garage of the family estate 2 hours ago, wrapped in a rag that smelled of Sarah's perfume. He recognized it as the knife missing from the kitchen set. He thought Sarah had done it. He thought his sister had cut the lines to get the inheritance, and he came here to bury the weapon because, despite everything, he couldn't bear the thought of his sister going to prison. My chest tightened. Jason hadn't come to finish the job. He had come to clean up a mess he thought his sibling made. He was trying to protect the family in his own misguided way, just like Robert was trying to save the company, and just like Sarah was trying to liberate the art. I looked at the file on the desk. The letters proving Sarah wasn't my biological daughter. Elena knew. She must have known. She had planted that knife in a rag with Sarah's perfume. She was orchestrating a symphony of destruction. She didn't just want me dead. She wanted my children to destroy each other. She wanted Robert to be the greedy failure, Sarah to be the patricidal maniac, and Jason to be the accomplice. I told Jason to pick up the phone. I told him to call her back. He hesitated, but he did it. He put it on speaker. Elena's voice filled the room. It was older, raspier, but I recognized the cadence. It was smooth, like velvet over broken glass. She asked Jason if he had found the safe. She asked if he had destroyed the letters. Jason looked at me. I nodded. He lied. He said yes. He said he burned them. Elena laughed. It was a chilling sound. She said good. She said that now, with the letters gone and the old man dead, the police would focus on the mechanical failure. She told Jason to meet her at the old airfield, not the one I jumped from, but the abandoned airstrip on the north side of town, at midnight. She said she had his inheritance ready in cash. Jason hung up. I sat down opposite him. I had to explain who Elena was. I told him the truth. Decades ago, before I met his mother, Elena and I were engaged. We were young, volatile, and dangerous together. Elena was possessive. When I met Evelyn, Jason's mother, I knew what real love was. It was calm, it was safe, it was nurturing. I broke off the engagement with Elena. She didn't take it well. She burned down my apartment. She was institutionalized for 5 years. When she got out, I was already married with kids. I filed restraining orders, moved towns, and eventually she vanished. I thought she was gone or dead. I was wrong. She had been waiting. She had been watching. She waited until the kids were adults, until the cracks in our family dynamic were wide enough for her to slip a crowbar in and pry us apart. She cut the parachute lines. She knew I was jumping because she had probably been stalking my social media or Robert's. She framed Sarah by planting the perfume-soaked rag and the knife. She manipulated Jason into being her mole, thinking she could turn him against me. And she likely tipped off the loan sharks about Robert's debt to keep him squeezed. I looked at the clock. It was 10 p.m. We had 2 hours. I told Jason we were going to that airfield, but he wasn't going to collect money. We were going to end this. I went to the safe in the floor, the one nobody knew about, not even Sarah. I pulled out my old service pistol. I checked the magazine. Jason asked me what we were going to do about the fact that the world thought I was dead. I told him that for tonight I was a ghost, and ghosts are terrifying. We took Jason's car. I lay in the back seat covered by a blanket. As we drove, I thought about Sarah. I thought about the letters. I realized that biology didn't matter. I had raised her. I had walked the floor with her when she had colic. I had paid for her art school even when I disapproved of it. She was my daughter, and Elena had tried to frame her for murder. The rage I felt now was different than what I felt in the hangar. It was cold. It was focused. We arrived at the abandoned airstrip at 11:45 p.m. The moon was obscured by clouds. The tarmac was cracked, weeds growing through the concrete. A single hangar stood at the far end, its metal roof rusting. I told Jason to park the car in the open, headlights off. I slipped out of the back and moved into the tall grass bordering the runway. I circled around toward the hangar. At midnight, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. A sleek black sedan rolled onto the tarmac. It stopped 50 yards from Jason's car. The driver's door opened. A woman stepped out. She was wearing a long trench coat. Her hair was silver now, but she held herself with that same arrogant posture I remembered. Elena. She walked toward Jason, who was standing by his car hood. I crept closer, using the rusting hull of an old Cessna as cover. I was close enough to hear them. Elena stopped 10 feet from Jason. She didn't have a bag of money. She had a gun. She smiled. She said, "You were always the weak one, Jason, just like your father." Jason's voice shook, but he held his ground. He asked where the money was. Elena laughed. She said there was no money. She said Jason was the loose end. She explained her plan with gleeful pride. She said the police would receive an anonymous tip tomorrow morning. They would find the knife with Sarah's prints, from the rag, in Jason's car. They would find Jason dead here, an apparent suicide from guilt, and Robert would be ruined by the debts. She was going to wipe out my entire bloodline in one stroke. She raised the gun, aiming at Jason's chest. She said, "Say hello to Douglas for me." I stepped out from behind the Cessna. I shouted, "Tell him yourself, Elena." She spun around. The look on her face was worth every second of this nightmare. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth fell open. She looked like she was seeing a demon. "Douglas?" she whispered. I walked into the light of the headlamps. I looked alive. I looked angry. I said, "You cut the lines, Elena, but you forgot one thing. I always check my gear." She recovered quickly. She was always crazy, but she wasn't stupid. She swung the gun toward me. She screamed that I should be dead. She screamed that I ruined her life. She fired a shot. The bullet kicked up gravel near my feet. I didn't flinch. I kept walking toward her. She fired again. This time the bullet grazed my arm. I felt the sting, the warm trickle of blood, but I didn't stop. Jason screamed and lunged at her. He tackled her around the waist. The gun went flying across the tarmac. They wrestled on the ground. Elena was scratching and biting like a wild animal. She was screaming about how I stole her future, how I owed her this life. I ran to them. I grabbed Elena by the back of her coat and hauled her off my son. She flailed, trying to claw my eyes out. I pinned her against the side of her car. She was panting, spitting at me. She looked old, bitter, and pathetic. She hissed that it didn't matter. She said she had already sent the evidence to the police. She said my family was broken beyond repair. She said Sarah knew about the paternity, that Robert was a criminal, and that I was a fraud. I told her she was wrong. I told her that family isn't about blood or money. It's about who shows up when the parachute fails. I heard sirens in the distance. Jerry, my pilot friend, had come through. I had texted him the coordinates on the way over. Elena slumped in my grip. The fight went out of her. She started to cry, a high, keen wail of a woman who realized she had wasted 30 years on hate. The police cruisers tore onto the runway, lights flashing. I looked at Jason. He was bleeding from a scratch on his cheek, but he was standing tall. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw my son, not a stranger. But the story wasn't over. As the police handcuffed Elena and led her away, the lead detective walked over to me. He knew I was supposed to be dead. It took a lot of explaining. However, amidst the chaos, my phone, which I had retrieved from my own car, pinged. It was an email notification. It was from Robert. It was a scheduled send email. He had set it to send 3 days after my death, assuming the funeral would be over. The subject line was, "I'm sorry, Dad." I opened it, standing there on the tarmac with blue lights flashing against the darkness. The email read, "Dad, if you are reading this, I'm dead. I couldn't live with the shame. The loan sharks weren't just threatening me. They threatened to burn down the factory. I made a deal with them. I signed over the deed to the land. I didn't know how to tell you. I'm going to the bridge tonight." My blood froze. Robert wasn't at the airfield. He wasn't safe. He was at the bridge. He thought I was dead. He thought he had lost the company and he was going to jump. I had cleared my name. I had caught the killer. But I was about to lose my firstborn son. I grabbed Jason. I screamed at the detective to give us an escort. We had 20 minutes to get to the bridge. The ride to the bridge was a blur of asphalt and red strobe lights. I sat in the back of the police cruiser, my arm throbbing where Elena's bullet had grazed me, but I couldn't feel the pain. All I could feel was the terrifying possibility that I had saved my own life, only to lose my son's. Jason followed behind us in his car. I had the detective, a man named Miller, blare the sirens. I didn't care if we woke up the whole county. We reached the suspended bridge that spanned the river valley. It was a notorious spot. The railings were high, but not high enough to stop a desperate man. The cruiser screeched to a halt. Miller killed the sirens, fearing the noise might startle Robert. I scrambled out of the car before it had even fully stopped. The wind was howling up here, cutting through my jacket. It was pitch black, save for the street lamps that cast long orange shadows against the steel cables. I saw him. Robert was standing mid-span. He wasn't on the ledge yet, but he was leaning against the railing, staring down into the abyss of the dark water below. He looked defeated. His shoulders were slumped, his tie undone, his suit jacket flapping in the wind. He looked like a man who had run out of road. "Robert!" I screamed. My voice cracked. He didn't turn around. He just shouted back into the wind. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I failed you. He gripped the railing and hoisted one leg over. No. I sprinted. I am 58 years old with bad knees and a bullet wound, but I ran faster than I had ever run in my life. Robert, look at me, I roared. I am not dead. That stopped him. He froze, straddling the railing. He turned his head slowly, likely expecting to see a hallucination brought on by guilt. I stepped into the pool of light from the nearest lamp. I spread my arms. It's me, son. It's really me. Robert's face crumpled. He squinted, tears streaming down his face. Dad? I walked closer, slowly, hands up. I'm here. I faked the jump, Robert. I had to find out who cut the lines. I'm alive. The company is safe. You don't have to do this. He shook his head, trembling violently. No, you don't understand. I signed it away. The factory, the land, the sharks, they have the deed. I ruined your legacy. I have nothing left to give you. I reached him. I didn't grab him aggressively. I reached out and took his hand. His grip was ice cold. I don't care about the factory, Robert. It's just brick and mortar. It's just machines. You are my son. You are my legacy. Not the building. You. He sobbed, a guttural sound that tore at my heart. But the debt. We will fix it, I said firmly. I am Douglas. I built that empire from nothing, and if I have to, I will build it again. But I cannot build another you. Now get your leg back on this side of the railing before I drag you over here myself. He hesitated for a second, then collapsed forward into my arms. I hauled him onto the pavement. We fell to the ground together, a heap of exhausted, broken men. Jason ran up a moment later, breathless, and joined the embrace. The three of us sat on that cold bridge, crying in the dark. The next few hours were a whirlwind of logistics. We went to the hospital first. I needed stitches for my arm, and Robert needed a sedative to calm his nerves. Jason stayed by our side the entire time. By the time we got back to the family estate, the sun was coming up. The police had finished processing the scene at the airfield. Elena was in custody, charged with attempted murder, sabotage, and a laundry list of other crimes. Her decades of planning had ended in a concrete cell. But there was one final piece of the puzzle missing. Sarah. I called her. She didn't answer. I texted her. Come to the house. I'm alive. We need to talk. She arrived 20 minutes later. She stormed through the front door, looking like she hadn't slept in days. When she saw me sitting in the armchair, bandaged and sipping coffee, she stopped dead in her tracks. She didn't run to hug me. She stared at me with a mix of shock and fury. You're a bastard, she whispered. I deserve that. I stood up. I know. Do you have any idea what you put us through? She yelled. Her hands were balling into fists. I was mourning you. I was grieving you, you selfish old man. I thought you hated me, I said quietly. She froze. I saw the painting, Sarah. I saw you slash it. I heard you on the phone saying my death was a relief. Sarah's face flushed. She looked down at the floor. I slashed the painting because I couldn't look at it, she said, her voice trembling. I painted it weeks ago because I had a nightmare that you died. It was a premonition. I couldn't get it out of my head. And when you actually died, looking at that canvas made me feel like I had caused it, like I had manifested your death. I destroyed it because I was angry that I never fixed things with you. She looked up at me, tears in her eyes. And I said it was a relief because it was easier than admitting I was heartbroken. It was easier to be angry at a tyrant than to mourn a father I never got to understand. I walked over to the desk and picked up the file. The file containing the letters about her biological father. I know about this too, I said. Sarah saw the file. She went pale. You know? I nodded. She swallowed hard. I found out 3 years ago. Mom left a diary. I read it. That's why I pulled away, Dad. I felt like a fraud. I felt like I didn't belong in this family. I thought if you knew, you would cut me off. You care so much about bloodlines and legacy. I took the file and walked over to the fireplace. I struck a match. Dad? What are you doing? I tossed the file into the flames. I watched the paper curl and blacken, the secrets of 30 years turning to ash. I don't care whose DNA you have, I said, turning to face her. I changed your diapers. I taught you to paint. I sat in the front row of every terrible school play you were in. You are my daughter, Sarah. And nothing, not a letter, not a biological technicality, and certainly not my psychotic ex-girlfriend, is ever going to change that. Sarah broke. She ran to me, burying her face in my chest. I held her tight, completing the circle. Robert, Jason, and Sarah. All of them broken, all of them imperfect, but all of them mine. The next week was business. Brutal, efficient business. With Elena behind bars, Detective Miller had free rein to investigate her accomplices. It turned out the loan sharks who had terrified Robert were acting on information Elena had fed them. She had tipped them off about the company's temporary cash flow issues to create the leverage. I didn't pay them off. I invited them to a meeting at the factory. When they arrived expecting to take the keys, they found me sitting at the head of the conference table. Behind me stood Detective Miller and a SWAT team. We had them on extortion, racketeering, and conspiracy. The deed to the land was returned to us as evidence of a crime was seized. Robert was reinstated as VP, but I put him on a strict mentorship program. He had to learn that hiding mistakes is worse than making them. He had almost killed himself out of shame. We agreed that from now on total transparency was the rule. Jason, surprising everyone, asked for a job. He didn't want to work in the office. He wanted to work in security. After seeing how easily Elena had infiltrated our lives, he wanted to make sure it never happened again. I appointed him head of security. He was good at it. He had an eye for the shadows now. Sarah went back to painting, but her style changed. She stopped painting dark, distorted figures. She painted a portrait of the three of us, Robert, Jason, and me, standing on a bridge at sunrise. She called it the second jump. As for Elena, justice was swift. The testimony of my children, combined with the forensic evidence from the parachute and the audio recordings I had made, buried her. She was sentenced to 25 years without parole. I went to her sentencing hearing. I wanted her to see me one last time. When the judge read the verdict, she looked back at the gallery. She locked eyes with me. She didn't look angry anymore. She just looked empty. She had spent half her life hating me, and now she would spend the rest of it in a cage, while I walked free. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright afternoon sun. My 3 children were waiting for me by the car. I am 58 years old. I have a bad arm, a recovered business, and a family that has been to hell and back. I don't think I'll go skydiving again. The rush of the free fall was exhilarating, but I learned something important that day in the hangar. You don't need a parachute to survive the fall. You just need people waiting to catch you. I got in the car. Let's go home, I said. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it.
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales like this, hit subscribe.